The morning was thin and gray, the kind of winter dawn that feels like the world is holding its breath. I parked the old truck at the edge of the field, the engine's rumble fading into the vast silence. The well lay ahead, half swallowed by weeds, its stones slick with frost. I hadn't been here in years, not since the day Mira disappeared. But something inside me insisted I come back, as if the cold soil itself whispered her name. The wind moved in slow, hesitant gusts, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I drew my coat tighter, shivering more from anticipation than the cold. My boots crunched through frozen mud as I approached, each step echoing in the quiet. The well stood like a sentinel, unchanging, watching, and I felt the weight of years press on my shoulders. I knelt beside it, letting my gloved hands brush against the frozen ground. The dirt was soft in some places, surprisingly yielding, as if it had been waiting. My fingers traced small disturbances, marks too deliberate for wind, too careful to be an animal's doing. My breath fogged in front of me, curling into the gray light and mingling with the stillness. The quiet felt alive, listening. I could almost hear the memories pressing up from beneath the soil, the echoes of a daughter I'd failed to protect. The first handful of dirt came loose beneath my gloves. I dug slowly, deliberately, as though I could coax the earth to tell me its secrets. My heart thumped in time with the small clinks and scratches of stone and soil. The frost melted beneath my hands, leaving them damp, gritty, cold. Every handful of earth brought a pulse of hope and dread. And then, my fingers brushed something different. A folded edge of paper tucked beneath the soil. My breath caught. I paused, letting my palm rest against the damp envelope. Whose hand had buried this? Why had it been left for me? I unfolded it carefully. Even before my eyes traced the words, I recognized the handwriting Mira. Her loops, precise and familiar, carried me back decades, to school notebooks scattered across the kitchen table, to ink-stained fingers hovering over journals, to evenings when she whispered her dreams before falling asleep. The ink was smudged at the edges, dampened by earth, yet the urgency remained, palpable. She had been afraid. She had felt eyes watching her. She had left me a message I wasn't meant to see until I came here. The letter trembled slightly in my hands, and I read the first lines aloud under my breath. The words curling through the fog. If you're reading this, then I didn't come home. I swallowed hard, the air thick with frost and grief. Why the well? Why here? The place had always been quiet, hidden, the kind of spot where secrets could linger undisturbed. She must have chosen it because she trusted no one else, because she needed a place to speak her fear without being heard. I stayed kneeling, hands on the damp dirt, staring down into the hollow where she might have stood or sat, or simply whispered to the cold air. I remembered our walks here, her small hand in mine, the way she'd laugh at the birds and the breeze. And now she was gone, leaving only words pressed into paper beneath my fingers. My chest tightened. The wind paused, and for a moment it felt as though the world waited for me to understand what she had endured. I rose slowly, carrying the letter as if it were both fragile and alive. The field stretched around me, pale and muted, the fog weaving a curtain between me and the distant farmhouse. I moved back along the path we used to walk, my boots leaving prints beside hers from years before, though I knew she wouldn't return to fill them. Every step was a conversation with her absence, every breath a reminder of the empty spaces she had left in the house, in my mind, in my heart. Reaching the farmhouse, the front door creaked as I entered. The house was still. The air smelled faintly of dust and the faint memory of meals once shared. I laid the letter on the kitchen table, light from the foggy window tracing the edges of the paper. The walls held their silence, the floorboards remembered every footstep, and the room seemed smaller than I remembered, compressed by absence. Photographs stared back at me, Mira smiling, unaware of the dangers she sensed, unaware of the distance that would grow between us. I picked up one of the photos, tracing her face with a fingertip. The warmth of her memory burned alongside the cold creeping into my bones. I set the picture down and opened the letter again, this time reading slowly, word by word. The sentences were careful, deliberate, but they carried tremors of fear, of urgency. Someone had watched her, someone she didn't name, someone she couldn't explain. And she had thought of me, of protecting me from this unseen threat. My hands shook slightly as I folded the letter, placing it back on the table. The house around me breathed quietly, holding echoes of laughter, arguments, evenings spent in quiet togetherness. I moved to her drawers, searching for anything else she might have hidden. Notes, sketches, small journals, any trace of what she'd carried in her mind and her heart. Most were empty, dust covered, but here and there I found fragments. Sketches of the well, the fields, the edges of the woods. Dates marked in margins, symbols circled, little observations about movements, sounds, and people she noticed. It was as though she had been chronicling something, protecting something, preparing for a night she knew might come. My heart beat faster. She hadn't been reckless, had not wandered blindly. She had been careful, methodical, leaving breadcrumbs for me to find. But what had she expected? What had she feared so deeply that she could only confide in paper, buried beneath a cold well? The weight of her foresight pressed on me. I had overlooked so much. Arguments about safety, warnings I had dismissed, nights when she refused to tell me her thoughts, they all folded into this moment, this realization. She had known danger and had tried to shield me from it. The clock on the wall ticked softly, a metronome to my spiraling thoughts. Outside, the fog shifted, curling along the roofline, slipping between trees, wrapping the house in a gray embrace. I could almost see her there, standing at the edge of the field, her breath forming clouds in the cold air, looking back at the house with eyes that saw more than I ever had. And for the first time in years, I felt a connection, not to her absence, but to the careful, clever, frightened mind that had left me the letter. It was a puzzle, a message, a plea. I sank into the old wooden chair by the table, staring at the folded paper. The texture of it, the damp smudge of ink, the small creases where it had been pressed and hidden. It was intimate, alive. It was her voice speaking through time, through earth, through absence. I listened to the silence around me, the small hum of the refrigerator, the distant crow of a morning bird, the wind tapping softly against the window pane. Everything in the house was waiting for me to understand, waiting for me to follow the trail she had left. Outside, the field held its secrets. The well, a dark circle in the pale dawn, and I felt the first stirrings of resolve. This wasn't just grief. This was direction. This was a map of fear and courage intertwined. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into my coat pocket. I would return to the well. I had to. Every instinct, every heartbeat, every memory pushed me toward the field, toward the cold stone circle, toward the answers she had left behind. I paused at the door, hand on the frame, listening to the quiet hum of the house. The photograph of her on the counter caught my eye again, and I whispered her name into the stillness. No reply, only silence, only fog, only the faint rustle of leaves beyond the windows. And yet, I felt her there, guiding me back to the place where she had hidden her voice, where the earth held her secrets, waiting for me to listen. The house smelled of old wood and dust. Each room carried its own silence, as though the walls themselves were waiting for me to notice what had been left behind. I walked slowly, letting my fingers graze the edges of door frames, the spines of books, the rough surfaces of chairs that had known her weight. Every step stirred memories, some soft, like the warmth of her small hand in mine, and some sharp, like the sting of arguments I had dismissed as adolescent defiance. I returned to her room, the one that had been hers since childhood. The bedspread still held faint impressions of her sleeping form. A thin layer of dust covered the dresser, but the scent of lavender lingered faintly in the air. I picked up a notebook, its cover worn and corners bent. Flipping it open, I found sketches of the well, the field, little annotations beside each drawing, dates, times, tiny observations. My pulse quickened. She had been meticulous. She had been keeping track of something, watching someone or something, noting each small movement each night she had gone out alone. I spread her papers across the desk, forming a rough map of her movements, circles around the well, arrows pointing toward the woods, dates scribbled in the margins, nights she stayed in, nights she disappeared, notes documenting conversations I hadn't remembered. Her handwriting seemed alive, urgent yet careful, like she was balancing fear with the need to protect me. I traced her loops and curves with my fingertip, remembering how she used to doodle in the margins of her school notebooks, unaware I was watching her hand glide across the page. Arguments we had about her safety replayed in my mind. I remembered the nights I scolded her for wandering too late, the evenings I lectured her about strangers. At the time, I thought she had been reckless, testing boundaries. But now I saw it differently. She had been careful, calculating, shielding me from the truth she could not speak aloud. The realization pressed on me like the winter chill seeping through the window pane. I had never really understood what she had been carrying all those nights. I sat in the chair by her desk, hands wrapped around the edges of the table, staring at the maps and notes. The house seemed to hold its breath with me, creaking softly, the floorboards groaning like they remembered her footsteps. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint echoes of her laughter, of her hurried footsteps across the frost-covered field. I imagined her pacing near the well, sketches clutched in her hands, eyes darting toward the woods, listening. What had she seen? Who had she feared? And why had she kept it all to herself? I found a series of sketches that showed the property in detail. The well, the surrounding fields, the edge of the forest. Dates were marked, some circled, others crossed out. Lines connected points on the paper, forming a pattern I couldn't immediately recognize. I leaned closer, tracing the lines, feeling the pressure of her hand, the care she had taken to record everything. It was as though she'd been leaving a trail, a set of breadcrumbs meant for me to follow. But why here? Why now? I felt a shiver run down my spine, realizing that she had been preparing for something, and I had been blind to it. I moved to her dresser drawers, small trinkets, notebooks, folded papers, all carefully organized yet layered with dust. Each object told a story: a worn glove, a photograph of the well, a pressed flower from the edge of the field. I lifted each item slowly, letting my fingers linger over the textures, feeling the memory embedded in the fibers. Even the smallest objects seemed to pulse with her presence. She had left pieces of herself behind, waiting for me to notice. One folded sheet caught my eye. It was different from the others, smudged at the edges, pressed into a small envelope. I unfolded it carefully. Her handwriting jumped off the page, frantic but precise. She spoke of someone watching her, of a fear she could not name. The words trembled with urgency. I don't know if I'll make it home tonight. If you find this, know I tried to protect you. My chest tightened. The letter was both a confession and a warning. She had known danger, had sensed it creeping closer, yet she had chosen to face it alone. I placed the letter down, running my hands over the desk, over the maps and notes, trying to absorb the weight of her preparation. Every night she had gone out, every note she had scribbled, every sketch she had drawn, it was all connected. I remembered small arguments I'd dismissed, nights when I hadn't understood why she hesitated to speak. Now the pieces began to align, forming a picture of caution, of strategy, of quiet courage. The shadows lengthened across the room as the morning light shifted, falling softly over the papers. I noticed faint impressions behind the ink on some pages, as if she had written in haste or under pressure. It made my stomach knot. Someone had been following her, watching her, and she had kept it from me. I realized that the fear I had once thought exaggerated was real. She had known more than I could have imagined. I moved through the rest of the house methodically. Every shelf, every drawer, every small box held remnants of her life: a scarf, a worn notebook, A faded photograph of her with friends in the fields. I traced the edges of the photo, recalling the carefree laughter, the moments I had taken for granted. And beneath it all, a quiet tension lingered, something unspoken, something she had been carrying silently, a burden she had chosen to share only with the earth beneath the well. By midday, I felt the weight of hours pressing on me. I gathered the letters, notes, and sketches, spreading them out on the table. Patterns emerged, dates, locations, movements. It became clear she had been observing someone, or something, for weeks. Nights she had stayed in, nights she had left quietly, always returning with small pieces of evidence, small observations, documented meticulously. She had been preparing for something significant, and I had been blind to her diligence. I leaned back in the chair, staring out the foggy window. The field stretched beyond, the well half hidden among frost covered weeds. My mind traced the path she had taken, imagining her movements, her careful glances, her hurried notes. The letters, the sketches, the impressions, they were more than memories. They were instructions, a narrative she had left for me to follow. My chest ached with a mixture of grief, regret, and a flicker of hope. She had trusted me to understand, and I had finally begun to see. The wind shifted outside, carrying a faint scent of damp leaves and cold earth. I felt the field calling, the well waiting, the echoes of her footsteps guiding me. She had left her trail intentionally, a quiet map of preparation and fear, and now I had to follow it, piecing together the fragments she had scattered to uncover the truth she had buried along with her courage. I picked up the first letter again, reading slowly, letting the words sink into me. Each sentence was a key, each word a thread connecting her fear, her strategy, and her hope that I would one day understand. She had not left me randomly. She had left me a story, a path to follow, a chance to protect her memory if I could not protect her. The house remained silent as I gathered the sketches and notes, my fingers lingering over each fold, each crease, each carefully penned loop. Outside, the wind whispered again, through bare branches and frost covered fields. And I knew that the next step, returning to the well, following her careful trail, uncovering what she had left behind, was no longer optional. It was inevitable. The fog hung low over the fields that morning. I walked slowly toward the edge of the woods, carrying Mira's folded notes and sketches in my coat pocket. Each breath left a ghost in the icy air, curling and vanishing before me. The ground was hard, frozen in places, soft and treacherous in others. My boots left prints that the wind would soon try to erase, just as time had tried to erase the traces of her movements. I stopped near the old well, its stones darkened by frost and years of neglect. The world around it seemed older than memory, as though it had waited decades for this moment. I crouched, letting my gloved hands brush away dead leaves, twigs, and the top layer of frost. Something about the earth here felt deliberate, as if it had been shifted recently yet gently. I could almost hear her footsteps echoing, small, careful, cautious. She had been here before me, leaving fragments meant to be found, meant to be understood. Following her sketches, I moved along the edges of the field. Small indentations in the dirt caught my attention, footprints half swallowed by mud, signs of hurried movement. My pulse quickened. I traced the prints with my gaze, imagining her pacing here, notes in hand, glancing back at the woods. The frost cracked beneath my boots as I stepped closer. She had been meticulous, leaving a subtle trail that only someone paying attention could follow. And I had to pay attention. The neighboring fields were silent, save for the occasional rustle of a crow or the distant lowing of cows. I approached a retired farmhand who had known Mira during the summers she worked here. His eyes widened when I mentioned her name. He remembered her pacing near the well, he said, her expression tense, almost frightened. Yet there was determination in her stride, a resolve that hadn't been broken even by fear. I pressed for more, gently, careful not to awaken old gossip or discomfort. He recalled vague voices near the woods that night, whispers too faint to understand, urgent enough to catch attention. Someone or something had been out there. I walked the paths she had traced in her notes. Each field, each small incline, each patch of frost covered grass seemed to hold a memory, a sign, a clue. I paused where the footprints ended, staring at the empty ground. The world was still, holding its breath. The sun rose slowly, throwing muted light over the frost, and I imagined her standing there, heart racing, scanning the woods, measuring danger. What had she been expecting? Who had she feared? By mid morning, I reached the wooded edge behind the well. The trees were skeletal, their branches clawing at the pale sky. The smell of damp leaves and decaying earth filled my nose. I knelt to inspect the ground, noting faint traces of campfires long extinguished, footprints half swallowed by mud, marks on tree bark. I touched the rough bark, imagining her leaning there, peering into the shadows, aware of eyes that might have been following her. She had been meticulous, leaving notes and markings, tracing patterns, and still questions outnumbered answers. A rusted lantern hung from a branch, swaying slightly, even though the wind had paused. I approached cautiously, feeling watched, feeling the weight of her presence as though she'd lingered in the fog with me. Who else had been using this land in secret? My fingers brushed the cold metal. There was a small scrape along the handle, subtle but deliberate. I remembered her sketches, her careful notes about the property, her observations about movement near the well. Someone had been here, someone she had feared. And now I was stepping into her path, following in her shadow. I returned to the edge of the field where the frost was thin. A heavy stone near the well caught my attention. Its position seemed odd, almost as if it had been moved. I knelt and pushed, feeling the earth give way beneath it. Beneath the stone, partially buried, was a small metal container. My hands trembled as I lifted it from the frozen soil. Inside, I found torn fabric, a rusted key, and another folded note in Mira's handwriting. My breath caught. She had hidden this deliberately, leaving it as a message, a record, a clue. The note spoke of fear, of someone watching her. The words were careful, deliberate, and urgent. "He knows about the well," it read. My stomach tightened. She had documented her fear, mapped it, and left tangible proof that she had been aware of danger. But who was he, and why hadn't she come to me? The questions pressed in like the cold fog around me, and I felt the weight of helplessness, the ache of not having seen it sooner. I remembered the man who had lingered near my gate, claiming to know her from the library. His hands had fidgeted, his eyes darting. I wondered if he knew more than he admitted. I resolved to confront him, to ask the questions I had avoided asking before. But first, I had to piece together her movements, her pattern. I walked through the fields again, following her late night steps, retracing the nights she had stayed out late. Each pattern built upon the next, a chronology of fear, courage, and calculation. By dusk, the fog returned, curling low over the field. I paused at the edge of the woods, feeling the crisp air bite my cheeks. I imagined her there, sketchbook in hand, watching shadows, noting sounds, counting footsteps. The memory of her careful observation pressed against my mind. I followed the faint traces of campfires deeper into the woods, stepping lightly on the soft ground. A single lantern swayed ahead, empty, but its presence felt deliberate. Someone had left it, or she had. I crouched near the lantern, tracing the faint footprints around it. The woods were quiet, but I felt the weight of eyes, the presence of unseen watchers. Her notes spoke of fear, but not panic. She had been precise, documenting, protecting, preparing. I could feel her discipline, her vigilance, her understanding of danger, and I realized she had been leaving a trail for me, not just clues, but a path to comprehend the fear she had carried alone. The night deepened, shadows lengthened, and I returned to the well once more. The ground was frozen, yet I remembered the soft patches where I had first uncovered her letter. I knelt, tracing the contours of the earth, imagining her hands doing the same. The fog wrapped around me, the quiet pressing in. The sense of being watched was no longer fear, it was expectation. She had anticipated that I would follow, that I would discover, that I would understand. Returning to the house that night, my mind raced. The notes, the sketches, the footprints, the campfires, they formed a fragmented story, but the pieces were aligning. She had been meticulous, deliberate, careful. She had been aware of danger, of watchers, of secrets in the shadows, and she had carried it all alone. The ache of not noticing sooner pressed against me, but I knew I had to keep moving, keep tracing her path, keep following the breadcrumbs she had left. I spread her notes on the table again, comparing them to the sketches, the memories of footprints, the echoes of campfires. Patterns emerged. The same nights she stayed out late, the same nights she retreated, the same places she observed. She had been protecting someone, me, without my knowledge. And now I was tasked with understanding her careful choreography, decoding her silent warnings, and piecing together the truth she had fought to record. The night pressed against the windows as I sat in silence. I felt her presence everywhere, in the notes, in the sketches, in the whispers of the wind through the fields. She had been preparing me all along, leaving the trail for when I was ready, and now I was. The next step would take me deeper, confront the shadows she had observed, confront the questions she had left unanswered, confront the reality of the danger she had sensed. The next morning, I awoke to the pale light seeping through the kitchen window. The frost had burned off overnight, leaving damp earth and the smell of thawing grass. I carried Mira's notes in the small metal container with me, carefully placing them on the worn wooden table. The torn fabric, rusted key, and folded note waited silently, like small fragments of a story she had been trying to tell me for months. I stared at them, hesitant to touch them all at once, afraid the pieces might overwhelm me if handled incorrectly. I remembered the man at the gate, the one from the library who had claimed to know Mira. His hands fidgeted, his eyes avoided mine, and when I mentioned the well, his composure faltered. I needed answers from him, but I also needed to understand what he feared. Something in his body language had told me the story wasn't fully his to tell, and yet it had a connection to the trail she left behind. By mid-morning, I found him outside the library, shuffling books and adjusting the signboard. He recognized me immediately, his face tightening for a moment before he forced a smile. "You came about Mira," he said, voice quiet, almost hesitant. I nodded and stepped closer, careful to keep my own anxiety subdued. "I need to know about the well," I said. "And anything you saw the night she disappeared?" His eyes darted to the ground, then to the shelves around him. I I don't know if it's safe to talk here," he whispered. I could sense the tremor in his voice, the unspoken fear that had mirrored Mira's own. I pressed gently, mentioning the notes, the sketches, and the small metal container. His gaze flicked toward them instinctively, then away. She was she was observing things, he murmured. Things I couldn't, shouldn't. She wanted to protect you, I think. But she didn't tell me everything. I leaned against the edge of the counter, the wooden grain rough beneath my hands. What things? I asked, voice low, steady, trying not to betray the urgency gnawing at me. He hesitated, swallowing hard. There were men talking about the land, about removing obstacles. I heard it once, accidentally. She didn't want to leave. She refused. I'd tried to warn her. That's all I know. The words hung in the air, heavier than the cold winter morning. I felt my chest tighten, as if the air itself had thickened. Mira's fear hadn't been imagined. It had been real, documented, deliberate. And I had walked past it, blind to the signs she had left. I glanced down at the metal container again, at the torn fabric and rusted key. She had been preparing for this, for whatever removing obstacles meant. I returned home and spread the contents across the table once more. The torn fabric, small but precise, might have been part of her bag or coat. The rusted key felt like it belonged to a small, locked chest or a drawer hidden for safekeeping, and the note with the chilling line, "He knows about the well," now carried the weight of a warning, a message meant to guide me through the shadows she had been navigating alone. Evening fell quickly. I decided to revisit the woods behind the well, retracing her movements one more time before night completely settled. The air was heavy with damp leaves and the metallic scent I had noticed before. I followed the faint traces of footprints around the long extinguished campfires. The swaying lantern still hung from the branch where I had seen it before, a silent sentinel in the darkening forest. I crouched beneath it, feeling the rough bark against my palms, imagining her there, noting every detail, every movement, every sound. Suddenly, I heard a soft rustle behind me. My heart skipped a beat. I turned slowly, scanning the shadowed trees. No one was there, yet I felt the weight of someone or something watching. The rusted lantern swung slightly, though no wind had touched it. Her presence felt tangible here, as if she had just stepped away, leaving a breadcrumb trail that only I could follow. Following her final pattern, I arrived at the heavy stone near the well. It had shifted slightly since my last visit. I pushed it aside carefully, revealing the small metal container again. My fingers brushed against it as though touching her, tracing her meticulous placement. I opened it once more, laying its contents flat in the frost-tinged grass. Each piece felt like a key, a signal, a message demanding attention. The night pressed down fully and the forest grew silent. I studied the footprints around the container, noticing subtle impressions I hadn't seen before, signs of someone else's presence, a trail that wasn't hers. Someone had been here moving quietly, deliberately, observing. My pulse quickened. Could these be the men from the library man's warning? Or someone else entirely? The realization made the shadows feel heavier, more immediate, as if danger lurked just beyond the faint glow of the moonlight. I returned home later, my coat damp, gloves frozen at the fingertips. Inside, I carefully documented each observation, cross referencing her notes, sketches, and dates. A pattern became clearer. Nights she stayed out late, nights she retreated, nights she observed the woods and the edges of the field. Her meticulous record keeping, combined with what the library man had admitted, painted a picture of someone living in quiet vigilance, aware of threats, taking steps to document, protect, and leave me a trail. The next day, I visited the neighbors who had been near the fields that night. One recalled hearing her cry out, soft, brief, quickly muffled. Another remembered seeing shadows moving, figures indistinct but present, as though the field had been under silent surveillance. Piecing together these accounts with her notes, a timeline emerged. She had left home around dusk, proceeded toward the well, paused near the woods, and left evidence of observation. Campfires, lantern, footprints, sketches, and hidden messages. By late afternoon, I returned to the library man. This time, I needed specificity. "Who were the men?" I asked, voice steady but urgent. He avoided my gaze at first, then finally admitted, "Property disputes. Tensions over the land near the well. They threatened anyone who asked questions, anyone who tried to document their actions. Mira, she didn't want to leave, even though she knew it could be dangerous." I left the library that evening with a heaviness in my chest. Her fear, documented in notes and hidden in the frozen earth, had been real. Her careful vigilance, her nightly observations, her notes, her patterns, they weren't signs of recklessness. They were signs of courage, of quiet determination to preserve the truth and to protect me, her father, from what she had witnessed. Returning home, I sat by the table with the metal container and her sketches. I spread everything out again, laying them flat like a map of her life and her fear. My fingers traced the circles she had drawn around the well, the dates in the margins, the meticulous handwriting that had always seemed so ordinary, but now revealed a careful, deliberate planning. She had been living in silence, documenting in hopes that I could follow, that I could understand, that I could find a path through the shadows she had sensed long before her disappearance. Night settled over the house. I lit a single lamp on the table, its soft glow illuminating her notes, sketches, and the contents of the container. The shadows flickered across the walls, merging with the memories I had of her. Her laughter, her footsteps, the curl of her hair, the intensity in her eyes when she concentrated. For the first time, I felt that she hadn't disappeared into nothingness. She had left signs, left warnings, left a story meant to be uncovered by someone willing to see, someone willing to understand. I read her notes once more, line by line, heart hammering with each word. He knows about the well. I traced the letters with my fingertips. Who was he? What had she anticipated? And why did she choose this method, this silent trail, this careful choreography to communicate the truth she had lived with alone? The forest, the fields, the frost, the footprints, the campfires, the swaying lantern, they were all a puzzle she had crafted. And now it was my task to solve it. Not recklessly, not in panic, but with patience, attention, and reverence. She had left me the pieces, I had to find the pattern. Before sleep claimed me, I returned to the table, arranging everything carefully. The metal container in the center, notes and sketches around it, fabric and key beside them. I whispered her name into the quiet room. Mira, I see now. I understand. I will follow your trail. The night held its breath. Outside, the wind paused as if listening. Somewhere in the distance, I could imagine her steps, light, deliberate, moving through the frost, leaving signs, leaving hope. And in that stillness, I realized the turning point had arrived. The shadows were no longer just threats, they were a guide, a map to the truth she had labored to leave behind. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the radiator and the occasional creak of the floorboards, remembering long forgotten footsteps. I dressed quickly, pulling on my coat and gloves, and carried Mira's notes, sketches, and the metal container with me. The frost had returned overnight, a thin layer glinting faintly under the first tentative light. Every step toward the well felt heavier than the last, as if the earth itself knew the weight of the secrets it held. I paused at the edge of the field, staring at the horizon where the first golden sliver of sun began to appear. The air was crisp, the silence almost holy. Each breath fogged and curled into the morning, like a soft reminder that I was still here, still able to search, still able to honor what she had left behind. My fingers brushed the edges of her sketches, tracing the circles she had drawn around the well, the lines marking footprints, the faint annotations of dates and movements. She had charted her path meticulously, leaving breadcrumbs that only I could follow. I approached the well cautiously. The stone felt icy under my hands as I rested against it, my eyes scanning the surrounding earth. The metal container was there where I'd left it the night before, and beside it, small disturbances in the soil suggested someone, or something, had been watching, moving carefully, leaving subtle traces. I knelt slowly, letting my knees sink into the frost-hardened earth, the cold biting through my trousers. My breath came in shallow clouds curling into the still air. I felt her here with me, not physically, but in every detail, in every trace she had left. I opened the metal container one last time. The torn fabric, the rusted key, and the folded note were all familiar now, yet each felt heavier, more significant. I held the note in my gloved hands, the edges soft from months of buried dampness. My fingers trembled slightly as I unfolded it, revealing the loops of her handwriting, so familiar from the school notebooks, so intimate, so deliberate. She had written carefully, knowing I would find it. She had left a trail of thought, fear, and courage for me to follow. The words hit me like frost on skin. If you're reading this, then I didn't come home. There was no panic in her handwriting, no exaggeration, only honesty, and the quiet urgency of someone who understood danger intimately. She described her observations, her movements, the shadows she had seen, the men she suspected. Each line was a fragment of a map, a puzzle she had constructed in secrecy, leaving me the pieces with the hope that I would understand, that I would carry on where she could not. I sat back on my heels, the container resting beside me. I could hear the faint trickle of water from the well, the wind moving through the trees, and for a moment, the world was reduced to these small, simple sensations. I closed my eyes and imagined her footsteps that night. Light, deliberate, cautious. The way she had paused, looked around, documented, and hidden. The way she had tried to protect me from what she had seen. And I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. This was an act of love, not fear. Courage, not recklessness. I stood slowly and turned toward the woods, tracing the path she had taken in my mind. Each footprint, each extinguished campfire, each swaying lantern was now a story, a signal, a signpost. She had been meticulous, precise, careful to leave the evidence in such a way that it could be pieced together. The realization made my chest tighten, not with panic, but with reverence. She had trusted me to follow, to understand, to act, with the knowledge she could not carry herself. By mid morning, I returned home with the container and notes. I spread everything on the dining table, the lamp casting a soft circle of light over the evidence she had left. Photographs of her scattered among sketches, maps, and notes, and I saw the young girl in them. The one who had laughed, danced, argued, and lived in ways I had sometimes taken for granted. I touched a photo gently, remembering her warmth, her voice, the curl of her hair, the sharpness in her eyes when she had been determined. And I knew finally that she had left more than fear behind. She had left truth. I organized her notes, placing them alongside the dates, sketches, and footprints I had tracked. Patterns emerged with clarity. Nights she had withdrawn from the house, nights she had watched, nights she had documented something only she had seen. Her strategy was brilliant in its quiet simplicity. She had been preparing for the unseen, cataloging dangers, observing, recording, ensuring that the story of what she had discovered would survive her absence. In the afternoon, I made a list of names mentioned in her notes, people who might know fragments of her last days. I visited neighbors, local farmers, and even the man from the library, carefully asking questions without revealing everything I had found. Small pieces came together: overheard conversations about land, warnings whispered in hushed tones, fleeting glimpses of figures near the well. Mira's intuition had been correct. She had known more than anyone had given her credit for. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the field. I returned once more to the well, metal container in hand, notes tucked carefully under my arm. The frost had melted slightly, leaving damp impressions in the earth. I knelt again, brushing my fingers over the soil where I'd found her first letter. The memory of that moment, the weight of her handwriting, the faint odor of damp paper, the impossibility of her absence, hit me fully. And yet, it was accompanied by an unexpected sense of warmth, a feeling that she had not been taken, that she had acted deliberately, and that her actions had purpose. As twilight fell, I imagined her standing near the trees, glancing back at the well, ensuring I would find her signs. The wind shifted, brushing against my face as if carrying her presence. A faint rustle of leaves sounded like her voice in memory, gentle, careful, guiding. I stood quietly, listening to the evening settle over the field, over the well, over the forest she had observed so carefully. Returning home, I laid out all evidence on the table once more: her letter, the notes, the sketches, the fabric, the key. I called the authorities, providing them with everything I had discovered. The investigation into the land disputes, threats, and disappearances began in earnest. Though Mira remained physically absent, her work, her careful documentation, ensured that the truth could not be buried. Night fell fully, and I sat by the lamp, reading her letter for the final time. The line that had first haunted me now felt like a quiet benediction. If you're reading this, then I didn't come home. I understood it differently now, not a plea, but a guide, a statement of trust, an instruction to follow, to uncover, to continue. She had not vanished without purpose. She had acted with foresight, and courage. The first hint of dawn the next day found me standing by the well again. The frost had returned, glinting in the rising sun, the mist curling around the stones like soft fingers. I read her letter one last time, feeling the texture of the paper, tracing the words with care. I breathed in the crisp morning air and imagined her steps beside mine, guiding me, trusting me. The warmth of understanding spread slowly through me. Though she remained absent, her presence filled the space in ways I had never known possible. I placed the metal container back in its careful hiding spot beside the well, knowing that it was now both a memorial and a map. Every object, every note, every footprint was a part of her story, a story I was finally beginning to comprehend. Standing there in the pale golden light, I understood that uncovering the truth, following her trail, and honoring her courage were acts of connection. The warmth was faint, but it existed. She had left me a path, a guide through shadows, and in that act I felt her presence and her love. The wind paused as if listening. The trees held their breath in the field. The well and the forest seemed to breathe with me. I folded her letter carefully, placing it back among the sketches and notes, and whispered softly, "I see you now, Mira. I will continue." And in that quiet moment, as the sun rose fully over the frost-tinged field, I understood. This was not an ending. It was a continuation, a slow, deliberate act of remembrance, truth, and hope. Her courage had reached across absence, leaving a trail that I could follow. And I would. The well remained still, the earth unbroken, the container undisturbed. But for the first time, I felt that its silence was not a void. It was a bridge between her and me, a bridge I would cross again, carefully, faithfully, with every step echoing her vigilance, her love, and her unwavering courage. Thank you for watching. Your trust, your time, and your support truly mean everything. If this video brought you value, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel reach those who need it most. Stay focused, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next video.